Hello, everyone, and welcome to 1v1 with Boss Rush Games. I'm your host, Celeste Roberts. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Mira Marquez, founder of 1UP Chocolate and an experienced user interface and user experience designer. Hey, Mira, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's good to see you, Celeste. Good to meet you, and I'm really happy to be here talking to you guys today about 1UP Chocolates, and I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. Today is Memorial Day. That is when we are interviewing. So when this interview comes out, it's probably going to be a little bit away from now. But I first heard of 1UP Chocolates when I was scrolling through Instagram, and I want to say it was a sponsored post. I don't know if that's accurate. If you do those.
I do.
Okay.
The first month that I launched, to help kind of reach a wider audience aside from, friends and other networking opportunities I had, with other food businesses and so forth. I went ahead and did some ads the first month to see where that got me. Uh,
Oh,
so
awesome.
yeah, that worked out well. I'm glad you saw them because that led to this then.
Yeah, and I find Instagram is really good with ads, knowing my interest. It's a little eerie. I know what they're doing. I know they have that algorithm, but it's it's usually spot on.
Right, 100%. That's kind of the same case for me. And it was funny because I had a friend from someone I went to college with who had reached out to my partner. I was like, he had gotten an ad for the business too, but it was like right up his alley as well. So it was just like eerie to hear from somebody that like it ended up like targeting them and like hitting that audience. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, it looks like it paid off.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, or like your hobbies, your interests, your career, anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to go way back, I had been an artist my whole life. And because of that and loving video games and animation and animated films, I went to Savannah College of Art and Design in Savannah, Georgia. So I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna figure out something to go work in either video games or film. And then when I was at school, I got a little bit more into game development and at the time specialized in 3D modeling and animation. And so when I left college and started working in the industry, I was doing 3D modeling. And at the time, we're talking, a little over a decade ago, I worked at smaller like startups, for example, smaller studios, and that often meant you had to do multiple jobs to kind of cover all the bases. And so I started doing user interface and user experience design as well. And so that ended up being a transition for me over the years where I leaned more into that and really focused on that. And so I spent most of my career in games actually focusing on user interface and user experience design. And alongside that, I always had an interest in like baked goods, pastry, who doesn't love chocolate and sugar? It's really hard not to love that stuff. Um, and so it was one of those things like where I would, bake things. I always had interest, loved watching Food Network shows and kind of any like really good pastry books I could get my hands on. And I didn't know at the time how to combine those two interests, or, I feel like one would pull me for a little bit more in one direction and another, hobby or interest in another direction. And it wasn't until, what was this, 2021 now,
Mhm.
2018, where I saw that I live in San Francisco, by the way, for folks who are listening. And there's a San Francisco cooking school, which is in downtown SF. And at the time, they had recently just launched a part-time program, which is great for people who, either have full-time jobs or, you have kids or other responsibilities to manage. And when I came across that program, it was just kind of like the stars aligned, where I was like, I have an opportunity. I could do this program. I could do it part time. I didn't have to quit my job, which at the time I didn't want to because that's, diving into the deep end. I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted pastry to be my life full time or if I still wanted it to be kind of on the side. So it was a safe way to kind of get my feet wet and get into the world of pastry and learn more about chocolate and kind of figure out, is this really what I want to do potentially? And so I enrolled in the program, I was accepted. And so for all of 2019, I did their pro pastry program, which was a really great program. I loved it, and it filled in all of my gaps from cakes to, lamination, all over the board. Because prior going into that program, I had predominantly done cakes. I even did cakes professionally for a couple of years, like in between jobs and like filling in things. And so it was a really great program. And from that, I knew, I was like, okay, I want to do some type of business. Now, the question is, what is it? And how do I go about doing that? How do I start it? And the support network I had from the school was really great. They paired me up with another female food business entrepreneur, Neo Coco Confections, and she's another chocolatier. She does like unmolded truffles down in South San Francisco. And so they paired me up with her, and she was a really great mentor to figure out, like, okay, if this is the type of business you need to do, here's the things to figure out for your business plan and things to consider, kind of more on the business side. And so I came to the conclusion, I knew I wanted to do chocolates because chocolate is great. And I knew I wanted to do something with video games too. So I was like, all right, we're going to do video game chocolates. Now, what does that look like? And so it was pretty much like a 6 to 9 month process of figuring out, what exactly does the business look like? How is it faithful, not only to myself as a lover of video games, of chocolate, and then also how is it respectful to video games as well in the video game community? Because that's something, over the almost decade of working in the video game industry, is it's a small industry. And so you get to know people really well, and you see, depending on how many times you go to different studios, you often work with the same people over and over again every couple of years. And so I wanted to do something that would kind of shed some light about developers and also all the jobs that there are in the game industry as well. So that's why there's a little bit of information and history, kind of not only when customers receive my products, but also on my website about like kind of what goes into being a developer. And so, long story short, through all of this, that's kind of what One Up Chocolates came to be, more or less. And it's still growing. It's still very early on, considering I launched back in April.
Yeah.
Really, really young. And then, COVID threw a bolt into everything. And so, still going forward. Yeah.
That is awesome. So is it your full-time job right now, or it's still on the side?
So right now it's still a part-time job for me, because I still work full time, and I wanted to be able to ramp up the business and essentially make the mistakes where it's just me on my time. And that way it's a little less stressful that way. So I work part-time. I typically put about 15 hours a week into it. And I do that either in the early mornings or on the weekends. I've gotten a bit more in a routine where I typically go into the kitchen that I work out of from anywhere from like 5:30 to 8:39 in the morning, typically around 3 days a week during the week. And then on weekends, I do a lot of my marketing, and I do a lot of my more administrative side of the job.
Mm-hmm.
And this allows me, going through doing it myself initially, allows me to essentially make the mistakes, as opposed to if I had an employee or was doing this full time, the financial stress of it, because it's also being realistic too. Like if you go and just quit your job all of a sudden and not everything is planned out, or you don't have that proper planning for what are your finances for your business in order to support yourself for 6 months to a year, that could be really, really stressful. And so I rather essentially hustle this first year and kind of learn the ropes of my business and what's going to work for it. And then from there, once I'm able in a comfortable spot, and have knowing the business more, make a more educated and very much more understood decision of, okay, is this something I'm going to do full time and when?
Hmm.
So trying to do it as safe as I can, but even though it's being safe, it's also, you still have to hustle, you still have to put a lot of time and energy and work into it. So it is a bit to juggle, but it's definitely worth it.
That is awesome and very smart. That is a really smart idea, and I admire that because I think a lot of people I don't think a lot of people realize what goes into running a business. I've never run my own business, but just hearing from you, reading about it on Reddit, hearing from other people, just you, until you hire other people, you are a one person show.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one thing that when I was in pastry school and even when I was working with my mentor to, do my business plan and everything, and I would tell other friends or other people about the business who I was like interviewing to get better understanding of like how to do a small business and so forth. And they're like, "Oh, you're quitting your job, right?" And I was like, "No." They're like, "Why not?" It's like, well, that's a really hard band-aid to rip off. And it's at this point in time, like it's despite it still being, kind of stressful because it is a lot to manage. It's a lot to learn, a lot to figure out, a lot to navigate. It's it would be made exponentially more stressful if I didn't have the financial backing of my full-time job. And so I think that if I didn't have that, then that would be really just so stressful. And so I do believe that is like the smarter decision. It is more work up front, but at the same time, too, it's reassuring to know that if we're getting into the summer months and typically chocolate kind of slows down a little bit in the summer months because it's so much warmer. And so it's like knowing I have the financial backing of my full-time job to be able to support my business if I need to is just like it's a safety net. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much that goes into it. All this stuff you don't think about when you're a teenager.
Right.
Well, Well, I'm curious, and I'm sure some listeners are curious. Can you please explain user interface and user experience design? I'm not too, I have a very vague idea of what those are.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is UI UX is what it is for short. User interface, user experience design. It's often called product design nowadays as well. So if
Okay.
you hear that term, they're often the jobs are kind of interchangeable, and it varies a little bit by industry. In the game industry, it was UI UX for a long time, and it's only this past couple of years I've started to see jobs where they call it product design. And it's exactly kind of what it sounds like. So user interface, which is how does somebody interact with the interface of the product? So we think about gaming, whether it's mobile gaming or console gaming, what is your HUD? What does your menu system look like? What does your inventory look like? Like, what do those buttons look like that you
Mm.
press or you
Hmm.
navigate? So somebody has to think and plan out, often very organized people. um, what are all of these screens? What's the information that has to be presented to the user that's on them, and how is it organized? What does it look like? It would be, things like your menu probably shouldn't be red and green because that would be really straining for people who are colorblind. And so you have to think of these little considerations, not only for accessibility, but just so that way somebody who's playing your game, they aren't stumped by a menu. You want to transition them, keep them playing the game. So you want it to be as smooth and as clean as possible. And so, there's a lot of thought behind what do your interfaces look like and where is the information organized on those menus or on those screens. That way you're able to find what you need. And then the user experience side of it is mixed in a little bit of neuroscience. So you get a little bit of psychology and understanding like how your brain works, like what are habits, how does bias potentially influence a player for where they might want to go for things or where they think, maybe like in the case of inventory, thinking where you would access your inventory, or if you're playing a game and the A button all of a sudden was back instead of the B button, that
Oh,
goes
yeah.
that goes against what most games teach us, what we're used to. So that would really throw somebody off if they decided to switch that. And so you have to kind of look at and understand patterns and behavior patterns too, of not only what other games do, but what are people used to and what their exposure is. So that's kind of the psychology neuroscience side of it that gets looped in to the interface side. So when you're planning these interfaces and how people interact with the product, you also have to think about what they're exposed to and what they're used to. So
Yeah.
in a nutshell, and it's a little bit, there's this little aspect of psychology and neuroscience. It's a little bit of design, um, and a good bit of planning and organization as well. Yeah.
I'm glad that you brought up the psychology and the neuroscience because that's something I was reading on the One Up Chocolates website. I'm jumping, but these questions can happen in any order. So
Yes.
you mentioned on One Up's site that you like to work in elements of neuroscience. You like to work those elements into your pastries and chocolates, and you're describing user interface and user experience design or product design now as having those same concerns. So would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is this kind of tricky thing, when we look at video games, there's, you take Mario, for example, or Pikachu, they're very well identified characters. And so it would be also for the sake of legality, like I couldn't go make a chocolate that looks exactly like Mario, you know, the same shape,
Mm.
the M on the hat and everything. Because a lot of those things are copyrighted and just under legal protection. So you have to get creative about how you approach these things. And that's where that reliance on bias and perception is really important because I take basically an abstract minimalist painter's approach to designing the chocolate. So in the case of Mario, for example, Mario and Luigi, their color palette, all of the characters I do, they're done in this, abstract kind of Rothko-esque painting style where it's just lines of color, but the placement and color of those lines and also how thick they are can indicate other imagery. So in the case of Mario, there's red at the top, and then there's a line of tan, and then a small line of brown, and then more red, and then the gold, and then the blue. And that's to kind of visually indicate that it's Mario through the color palette that we're used to, and also the order of those colors that we're used to seeing him appear in. And so for the neuroscience side of it is for individuals who've seen or are familiar with Mario, that's most likely going to be the first thing that they recognize when they look at that picture.
Ah.
Whereas somebody who has never seen Mario before, they're just going to see some pretty colors in an order, but have no identification for it. So the reliance of somebody who has to have some video game interest is going to be able to identify, or exposure to be able to identify these characters in the chocolates.
Oh, I love that. And I love how artsy they are because I've been playing games since I was about 3 and I'm looking at your website right now as we speak and I can be like, "Oh, that's Mario, that's Luigi, that's the princess, that's Yoshi, that's Toad, that's
Yeah.
Bowser." So, and so Mario must have inspired the name of One Up Chocolates, correct?
Right. And there's a bit of like history that I try to work in because it is one of those things, especially to being, a UI UX person where you try to put a lot of thought and care into the decisions that are made. And so I wanted to think back to you on like not only what do I want from a business, like what do I want my chocolates to do? Like I want them to make people happy. Like I hope they bring a smile to your face and I hope they give you a boost to the day. Life can be rough. And so it's one of the biggest things is I just want it, you know, my chocolates to break that person's, if they're having a bad day, to like break that bad day, to just make them smile for a moment to enjoy what they're eating and hopefully be excited about it. And so thinking back to, early video game mechanics, the one up in Super Mario Brothers is it's a classic. And so it's also one of the first exposures that we often have as, you know, people who played video games. Like most people played Mario at some point in their life. It's either like Mario Pac-Man or like Tetris. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and so a one up, well, in the case of the game, it gives Mario, makes him bigger, gives him an extra life. And unfortunately, can't do that physically. So that's what made me in a line with the idea of, I want to make somebody happy or to give them a boost, and that's kind of where that mechanic aligned with the mission that I was trying to do with the product as well. So it
Oh,
became chocolates. Yeah.
I love that. It's so cute. And I'm just envisioning your chocolates. I would love to see them at like stores across the country around Valentine's Day, Christmas, or the holidays, I should say, Halloween. I can picture them in the Target section by the video games. How cool would that be?
Yeah, it's definitely something, as with everything, it's one step at a time at a day. And
Yeah.
so I'm really looking forward and excited to like not only making more products and really expanding my product line, but just making it bigger as well over time, more exposure, getting it in front of people, but then just sharing the message and also sharing the love of chocolates.
I love that. Now, would you like to talk about any of the games that you've worked on or the types of game? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about that. So, predominantly in my career, I've worked on, let's see, I have to think back now, going through the history. Um, I've worked on console games, I've worked on a little on PC, but predominantly most of my experience has been on mobile IPs. And mobile is always an interesting field too, where, people play for a variety of lengths of time. There's casual, there's a little bit more mid-core games on mobile. And as far as the mobile games I've worked on, I've worked anywhere from, I worked on a Chucky game like over 10 years ago.
Like the
Um,
doll, Chucky?
yeah.
Oh my God.
To I've worked on Ellen DeGeneres's some of her party games, like Psych, 5 Second Rule, a couple others. And then I also predominantly worked on a more of a military-esque game called League of War Mercenaries, which is like basically you have your team is composed of these tanks, and it's kind of like a tabletop military strategy game where you set out to fight other tanks. So it's more military-esque. And then I briefly worked on a PC game called Star Citizen. This was over 10 years ago when it first was announced. And that became one of the largest crowdfunded PC games ever. And so
What?
that's still a work in progress, from what I could see from the development team there. And yeah, and then I've also worked on a couple unannounced mobile titles as well, which is always unfortunate, but often that actually happens quite a bit in the video game industry, especially on mobile, where you'll work on a project and it's going strong and it keeps going, and then the project often gets shut down. So there's quite a few developers who have a good handful of projects that never get released, which is always it's always hard to see because you put so much time and energy and then you aren't able to really share it with the world. And so you have that gap on your resume as well. Yeah, and I've also worked on uh what is it? PlayStation VR. PlayStation VR title, which is where we took one of our mobile IPs, the tabletop strategy game League of War Mercenaries, and created a VR version, essentially a new VR IP for it as well. And so that was years ago when PlayStation VR kind of first came out. So that was a really fun experience to kind of work with VR and more hardware applications as well.
Oh my gosh, that's an impressive resume.
Thank you.
That is
All over
awesome.
the place. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, but it helps you have so much variety and so much insight on different types of games.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah,
what, yeah.
it's been a while. I want to say it's kind of been a wild ride. There's each game comes with its own challenges, especially as a developer. There's different goals, different deadlines, different audiences as well. So, whether or not you're making a game for essentially 40-year-old women who are, that's a completely different audience than 20, late teens, 20-year-old men. So it's always a little different and helps to keep it interesting to each game at a time. Yeah,
So what kind of games do you like to play?
that's a good question. So I'll classify it into two categories. There's games I like to play, and then there's games I like to watch other people play.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
As far as games that I like to play, I like story-driven games and typically more on the happier side. So, even though right now I'm playing Bowser's Fury Road,
Oh,
new
yeah.
Bowser game. Like, so games like that, or like Yoshi's Craft World, or things that are kind of creative but happy and cheery. Game I played a couple years ago, there was like a battle cooking game, which is really fun. But that it's either happy, kind of cute games or co-op games. So I love playing local co-op games with my partner. Ones that we could kind of play together, get through, which is always really fun because you're doing it as a team, which is great. I love that. And then the other side of things is still story-driven games, but the games that I like watching other people play because it's a little too stressful for me to play would be like Resident Evil or The Last of
Yeah.
Us. So there's parts, well, I could play through parts of it myself. It gets also emotional and stressful a little bit, so I like watching other people play, or like my partner will play through it. Um, and so that's really enjoyable for me. Like I still get really excited about it, but I'm like, I want to like sit there and just like watch.
I know exactly what you mean because I'm like that with the new Resident Evil 8 game. I'm
Yeah,
fascinated by it, but I like watching other people have to deal with the stress.
right, right. There's some parts of that game that are a bit calmer. It's like, okay, I could do this. And then there's other parts where I'm like, nope, 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 not going to even try.
I don't like being chased.
Right.
I don't no, no, not my kind of thing at
Yeah.
all. But you also, so not only do you have an awesome resume and all these cool hobbies, you have presented at the Game Developers Conference. Is that something you'd like to talk about?
Sure. So I presented at GDC. Oh, what? It's been, I'm gonna say almost 4 years ago. Um, and that was a really fun experience. That was definitely on my list before transitioning kind of out of the game industry, that it was something that I wanted to do. And so I presented on talking about the topic of essentially creating an IP on PlayStation VR's platform from a mobile IP. And what were the similarities? What are the things that you learn in designing for mobile, but then to turn around and take a similar IP and design it for a VR experience? And so that was a really good opportunity, and I'm really grateful that I was able to do that. And it's always really fun to present at conferences and continue to work on. There's always a little bit of nervousness in public speaking at that level, and it was just really fun to do. And I got to work with Celia Hodent, who's a renowned neuroscience and UX person within the video game industry. And so she was really helpful in helping me to kind of cater my presentation and edits and feedback, which was really great. And then that presentation, we, for the most part, learned when designing the VR game was about kind of what are the physical, not only strains, but restraints in a way as well for the player. And there was actions that we did in our mobile game that ended up being a little bit more stressful on the physical body when we try to transition them to VR. That would be, think of, in VR, you have everything in front of you, but in the case of the PlayStation VR, you have essentially the two handles that you hold on to, and you're able to move and press things with them. And so for some of our menu systems, we originally were going to do kind of a Mission Impossible design where, the screens are all in front of you digitally and you move your
Okay.
hands and you tap on them. But we found after a couple of minutes that was actually really tiring on a player's arm to have to lift really high to touch a button or if it was over their head. And so we found that there was more of a comfortability aspect that we had to incorporate into the game. And that would be things like keeping things at waist level, or if the player did have to lift their arm, it was very infrequently. So that way you didn't get the strain on your arms or the tiredness from like having to lift your arm consistently. And so that would be similar, like if you've ever done life drawing on an easel, usually for folks who don't
Oh,
do it really often, you're drawing and after 3 minutes, your arm's tired of holding the pencil out in front of you. And so it was kind of that similar experience where we kind of wanted to minimize those stresses on the player and kind of keep things a bit more comfortable for them throughout the game.
there's so much that goes into that.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what something when you were talking about the transition from mobile gaming to a VR game, I was thinking of how, for example, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, they're going to make it where you do not have to use some kind of controller physically like you did on the Wii. And
Mhm.
I know people have been begging for that, but that has to be so complicated to make that transition while keeping the same game experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I think, you experience. It always becomes a design problem, not only for the UI UX person, but also for the game designer as well, working on the product of how do you keep the same experience across all platforms. And it's if you didn't think about it beforehand to initially incorporate it during production, it can make that really stressful when that gets kind of presented in front of you later, like a surprise. um,
Oh.
so, and that's something we see. My current day job, I work for a drone company called Skydio, and that's something that we encounter a little bit where, we're designing for mobile applications or tablets, but then, we have a new accessory or things like that where you have to take into consideration of how do you keep the same experience across all these different devices that you might otherwise not have planned for in the beginning. And so that's something I can imagine those designers and those developers you have to experience. If you didn't think about that in the beginning, then it makes it a little bit more complicated when all of a sudden you have to think of, okay, we're changing the hardware or we're changing how we use this. How do we how do we transition it really well with keeping the same experience? Yeah, definitely a lot has to go into that.
I'm also thinking of Animal Crossing. I've been a huge fan of Animal Crossing since its GameCube debut, and I'll find myself as I'm playing New Horizons. Oh man, I wish my little character could do more with the bicycle or these toys or just whatever objects are lying around. But imagine that already there are so many options on how to make your character look. So I can't even imagine the amount of work that would go into making something simple like, oh, my character can take a shower, my character can ride a tricycle around the island.
Yeah. It's a bit different. But it's I think that's also one of the I want to say thrills, but maybe one of the adventure aspects of being either a game designer or like working UI UX too is you get all these different challenges, and while it sometimes is a little stressful, but it also keeps it really interesting. So
Mhm.
at least then everything is a little bit different each time. New problems to solve.
So, is there a certain season or a time of the year where you're busier than other times of the year, or is it just unpredictable in that field?
Oh, for game development?
Hmm.
So I think that depends on the product. So for mobile games, you could say that maybe that's a little bit more consistent year round. There's always going to be heavier kind of crunch times up until launch or up until a product goes to alpha, to beta, then to global release. Those deadlines are always a little bit stressful. And you often hear in the games industry people talk about crunch. Crunch is real. Crunch is, for the most part, it's a really unfortunate side effect, but often you see that closer to those big deadlines. And then in the case of, console games, typically you see a little bit more of an uptick towards the holidays because a lot of publishers and developers are trying to target that holiday season where there's a higher intake of purchasing for gifts and everything like that.
Oh man, yeah, that's. Oh man, that does sound about right, what I've heard about the video game industry. And so do you find making chocolates would be kind of a stress relief for you a little bit during those times?
Yeah, so it's one of those things. Baking has consistently always been a stress reliever for me. Like I love eating pastry, so it's great knowing when you bake something that you're like, all right, I can eat this in a little bit. And it's also one of those things that when I worked in the game industry, like I would always, and I still do this now with work. Well, not so much since we're all still working from home, but bringing, desserts or pastries in when I would make something is just a huge, not incentive, but it's a huge mood boost to, the team or other people you work with. And so when I do get really stressed, I do like baking, or planning something to bake. And I have a bunch of, pastry books and cookbooks. I'm always going through and like, okay, which one should I try next? Which one should I do then? It's always really fun to go through and like pick everything out. But it is a really big stress reliever, and is really, I think there's an aspect of it too where it's you're creating something with your hands and being able to see a physical product that you made. And so that's definitely something that transfers into when I make chocolates is you at the moment I get up super early. Like I got up and I went to the chocolate kitchen this morning and was making another batch of my level up stars, which are a mango passion fruit ganache.
Ooh.
And it's, getting up at like 4:35 in the morning, you're like, it's so early. But once I get into the kitchen, I start making things, it's really therapeutic and really relaxing. And it just kind of calms me. And it's really great to see and to make things with my hands and to know the delicious thing that's going to come out when I'm done is really great. So it is really therapeutic and really relaxing.
Oh, yeah, it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to have a great reward as soon
Yeah.
as I get out of bed, as soon as I invest the time, once I get it going. So, what are some of your favorite things to bake, and what are some of your favorite chocolates to make?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on what mood I'm in. As far as like what is my, because it with my chocolates, I don't have 100% favorite, like, because I love all of them, which I guess is probably how it should be, especially considering I'm making and selling them. They're all my favorite, but it depends on what I'm feeling that day and what mood I'm in, whether or not I want something that is more fruit forward or more nutty or, darker, or has like texture variety or sweeter. And so that really depends. Um, Consistently, like I love all my products. Not to sound corny, but the whenever I don't want to make a cup of tea or another cup of like a cup of coffee, I often like having my power up parts because that's an espresso caramel ganache. And so it's
Hmm.
like that little boost of caffeine, but without like a full cup of coffee or full cup of tea. And it's either that or if I feel like something more fresh, then I'll have one of my level up stars, which is the mango passion fruit, just because it's so bright and it just kind of makes you happy. It's really fruity. Whereas when with baking, that also depends on what mood I'm in, whether or not I want something really deep and like nutty and chocolatey, like really rich brownies, or do I want something like a carrot cake or something with like strawberry and lemon, something that's lighter and more summery, kind of depends. So 100% depends on what season is it and what mood I'm in.
Oh, I understand the feeling. I like baking as well. The only thing I hate about it is the cleanup.
Mhm.
I try to get everything going as in the dishwasher as I'm going along, but oh, the
Yeah,
mess and then wiping the counter. But it's all
right.
worth it. It's all worth it in the end.
Yeah, dishwashers make everything really great. I, for the most part, throw everything I absolutely can into the dishwasher. And usually the only thing that doesn't quite fit sometimes is like the baking pan. Like if I do brownies or some of the cakes that I do, the pan's a little too big or too odd shaped to fit in. So I'm like, all right, I really just have to clean one thing. It's not too bad. Mhm.
I know what you mean. And sometimes
Yeah.
pots need a good soak
Right.
after you.
Right.
Well, what is the process like? Like being a chocolatier? That's fascinating. That's not something everybody really does. It's very common to hear about people baking. I mean, anybody if they are pressed for time, they can grab a box cake mix. They
Yeah.
can pull out some ingredients that are probably staples in their pantry. But what are some of the challenges of being a chocolatier? Just everything about this process.
Yeah, absolutely. I have an idea. I'm gonna grab something real quick to help visually illustrate.
Oh, I would love to see that. I don't know if any listeners make chocolate, but if you do, please tweet us, please write into us because I've seen chocolate molds at places like Michael's and Hobby Lobby, but I've never really tried it. And yours is probably way more sophisticated.
No worries. It's actually pretty, I say it's pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of areas where things can go wrong. So I do something called molded bonbons or molded truffles. And molded truffles or bonbons are exactly what that sounds like. You use a mold. So this is an example of a mold. It's a Tetris mold, which is really cute. Something I'm going to introduce into my line later this year. So starting some testing now.
That's awesome.
And so this is a polycarbonate plastic mold. They make different materials, some that are thinner plastic, some that are silicone. You could use any of them, but it depends kind of then on the quality of what your product's gonna be. So if you have something that is or also the level of shine. So as a beginner, you could try using a silicone one just to kind of get used to working with chocolate and then work your way up to using one of these molds. These molds are typically a little bit more expensive, and by expensive, I say anywhere from $20 to $30 per individual mold. And so how you would use this is you would temper chocolate. Tempering is the process of taking chocolate, you melt it, you cool it down to a certain point, and then you heat it back up to a certain temperature. And this varies depending on which type of chocolate you're using. Often, if you get really good chocolate, like from Cho or Guittard or Valrhona, they tell you on the bag the temperatures to melt it to cool it to, and then to reheat it to. So you don't have to try to figure that out on your own. They'll tell you on the bag. And
Okay.
so you would temper the chocolate and then you would fill the cavities. So you'd fill these all up completely with chocolate. And then typically you bang the mold for a little bit, a couple seconds, just to get out any air bubbles. And then I would turn it out and empty all the chocolate out. And then I would scrape it so that way there's a nice clean line across the mold. And so what happens when you do this is you're left with a really thin shell of chocolate. And that is what you fill your filling with. It's basically the vehicle for all of your fillings. And so after you create that shell where you have that thin layer of chocolate in the mold, you would fill it with either caramel, ganache, like whatever else you want to have in the middle of your chocolate. And once you do that, then you would take a little bit of chocolate and you would put it on top. And that seals it, or we also call it capping, where you put essentially a cap on each one. And then, sorry, my voice is going a little bit.
That's okay.
um, and so once you cap all of your chocolates, typically you want to let it set for anywhere for like 20 minutes or so. And sometimes you need to put it in the refrigerator a little bit to kind of just get extra chill. And then you would pour it out upside down. And when you do that, the chocolates, if you've tempered your chocolate correctly, they should just fall right out. And then that's
Oh.
essentially how you get the chocolates in the mold and then out of the mold to eat them. The downside of this being it can be a little bit labor intensive. So if you're doing any type of decorations that you paint using colored cocoa butter, you typically have to paint the decoration and wait 24 hours for that to crystallize, which is where it
Oh.
kind of sets or solidifies, and then you put the chocolate in. So you can make a molded bonbon in anywhere from typically one to 3 days. So if you're doing decorations, you're probably looking at 3 days. if you don't have any hand painted decorations, you're looking at maybe 2 days. So it is a multi-day process to
Wow.
make them.
Oh, okay. Because you recently attended some pop-ups I saw on your Instagram page, and so I'm thinking there is no way that she prepared these that very morning. This had
Yeah.
to take a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is something you do have to plan a little bit, especially with like a business. Like I plan out which weeks I'm making which chocolates, and that depends on which ones I'm running low on, or if I'm trying to introduce a new product. One of the ones I'm working on right now is a line of vegan caramels that look like Pac-Man,
Oh, how
and
cute.
little Pac-Man ghosts. Yeah, so that one, um, that one I have to paint all of those by hand. And so I'll do the painting one day and then I shell it and we'll fill it the next day and then cap it on the third day. And so it is something I do kind of have to look a week in advance of like, okay, can I make this chocolate or this batch of chocolates this week and in what time? So yeah, definitely plan ahead. It's not something you can make real quickly. And even if you can make it really quickly, it would be a little concerning that it might not come out of the mold if you try to rush it. And so that is something else too. There is a good bit of patience that has to come with working with chocolate because you can't, the chocolate doesn't lie, I should say. If you temper your chocolate incorrectly, you get streaks or what's called fat blooms, where there's a slight discoloration because of the fat in the chocolate. And so, if that happens, then you might have trouble getting the chocolate out of the mold. So, you really have to be patient, make sure you hit those temperature marks, and then just be conscientious of the temperature of the stuff that you're filling it with. Because if you're filling your pipings really piping hot, you're going to remelt your chocolate that's already in the mold. And so it is something you kind of have to be patient and gentle with throughout the entire process. Because if you speed it up, then it's prone to accident.
Oh, I take it you've had some little maybe hiccups along the way, like everybody in any kind of
Right.
food making career. You probably like, oh, I need to not do this next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a learning process. I've had some, really hard days where like everything went wrong and I was like, what did I do?
Oh no.
uh, but that's something that it was definitely earlier on, like my month leading up until I launched, there was a bit of that because at the time I was just making everything at home, doing all my recipe development. And then when I moved into the kitchen that I rent, um, the the temperature of the room that I work in is roughly 10 degrees colder than the kitchen in my apartment. And so that changes everything. So everything crystallized, as in it solidified and hardened substantially faster than it did when I was at home. So my first two production runs that I did in the commercial kitchen were kind of a hot mess. But on the plus side, they each time it got better and better, and that was because I had to relearn my timing and how to do things a little bit because the room was colder. So instead of, I had mentioned you put the chocolate into the mold and you kind of like tap it a little bit to get out any air bubbles. At home, I would do that for about 20 seconds. In the kitchen, in my commercial kitchen, I do that for about 8 to 10 seconds. Otherwise, what will happen is the shell gets really, really thick, and that doesn't taste great in the mouthfeel. So you want a nice thin shell so that way it feels really good when you bite into it in your mouth. And so there's these little things that I had to tweak each time to get it back to where I wanted it to be. And so, like my first two production runs in the commercial kitchen, it was just like it was really stressful because I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? What am I doing wrong? And I just had to kind of after the first couple of times of making those mistakes, I was like, all right, I need to not make the same mistake again. So each time it got better, but then at the same time too, realize I'm new to this, and while I have good experiences and good practice, I'm new to running my own business and getting all of this figured out. So realizing that I just kind of had to let it go and roll with it, and it was going to be okay. Like, mistakes happen. So another reason why I'm glad it's just me at the moment and not having employees, because I can only imagine if I was teaching somebody else, like a new employee, how to do these things, that would have made it even way more stressful. And so, again, kind of going back to our earlier part in the conversation, it's almost refreshing to know that I can just make these mistakes and it's just myself before having to teach somebody that I would hire. So yeah, there was definitely mistakes in the beginning, and it's a continued learning process, even running my own business. I was doing a little bit of advertisement online, and then it's figuring out, how to ship orders, how to package them, make sure they get there unmelted, starting to do pop-ups. It's a whole world of learning how to navigate everything.
So how do you, I'm curious, how do you ensure that chocolates will make it to their destination? And like you said, with the summer months, it's getting a lot warmer. So what is that process like? Trying to figure out the logistics and hoping that they don't melt too much on the way
Yeah,
to the
absolutely. So
destination.
there's two parts to it. One is I check the weather. So in my case, here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, at the moment that we typically don't get too hot here on the peninsula. So I know that within 1 day shipping, that people who are kind of Bay Area local, they would get it and it would be fine. Whereas if I was to send chocolates to Florida in July, I probably wouldn't do that. Just because once it hits, chocolate starts melting around 75 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
And so, yeah. And so it would be one of those things where I would have to either contact the customer, or one of the things I'm going to start rolling out is um, for states and areas that are consistently in the 90s or above, is just shipping's not an option until the weather kind of comes back down to be a little bit cooler. Whereas there's other states and other areas that it is okay to kind of keep shipping a little bit throughout the summer. And that's kind of also where I've shifted more to doing a little bit more pop-ups and kind of local events. That way I don't have to mail anything. But in the case of shipping, and even, in the fall and so forth, I still check the weather and, keep a lookout for where this chocolate is going, making sure it's not too hot. And so temperature checking is one aspect. The other aspect of it is all the chocolates get mailed typically within 1 to 2 business days. And so that way I try to expedite how quickly the chocolate gets there to minimize any risks of it sitting either in a mail truck that is maybe unair conditioned and it possibly melting. So fast shipping, check the temperature of the weather. And then the other aspect of it too is the actual box. So my packaging is a nice rigid cardboard. And so that's really great for as it gets a little bit hotter, it keeps it a little bit more insulated and it
Mm.
retains the temperature a little bit better just because it's a bit thicker. And so that is helpful. But on top of that, I also ship all of my chocolates with an ice pack. And that goes into an insulated envelope. So not only am I trying to make sure that the chocolate gets there as intact as possible, I give it a little support with the ice packs. And then also for long-term shipping, I do freeze my chocolates. And that is perfectly fine to do. It doesn't change the taste or anything like that. And so that is just like all these little extra boosts to help to make sure that the chocolate gets to its destination as intact and perfect as possible.
Oh my goodness. Okay. When you said Florida, I live in southern Louisiana, so I probably am not a good candidate for the summertime.
I'll keep you booked, Mark, for the fall.
Thank you. Yes, please, because I've been looking at your chocolates and then I'm looking at our weather and I'm thinking this could be a bad idea. And we also have hurricanes down here and that starts June 1st. So it could be, no pun intended, the perfect storm of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, it was, and also humidity is not fun for chocolate either, because that's the other part. Aside from heat, chocolate really does not like moisture. that will also cause it to bloom, and you'll start noticing spots on chocolate if it's exposed to high humidity. And so, yeah, humidity, not good. Heat, not good.
Oh my goodness. And what is the farthest that you've had to ship so far? I know you're still pretty new, but have you had any like really out there places yet?
Yeah, so I do ship to the East Coast, and so across the country. I don't do any shipping to Alaska, Hawaii yet. I haven't had that happen, and not no international chocolates either. So because taxes.
Yeah.
But I have shipped quite a bit to Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Virginia, all along the East Coast, and those have worked out perfectly fine. Fortunately, I did a test shipment with I have a cousin who lives in New Hampshire, so I before launching was like, all right, I'm gonna send you some chocolates. Let me know how they arrive to make sure. And so everything worked out fine. So it was just a little bit of reassurance before, essentially fully launching to making sure that I could ship to that location safely.
Oh, I'm glad you had somebody you could ship to.
Yeah.
That is really convenient. So you also on your website, on One Up Chocolate's website and your Instagram, this is going back to your career, your full-time job, you like to highlight a developer each month. And can you tell us like what sparked this? This is a really awesome endeavor.
Thank you. Yeah, it was something I want to do. It definitely is a little bit extra work to add on to the existing workload. But it is something that I wanted to find a way to kind of give back to developers a little bit and also highlight all of the different jobs that are in the game industry because when we think about the games industry, I know when I was younger, I didn't quite think of all the different jobs that actually are there, in large part because I wasn't exposed to them and had no idea. And so, there's dozens upon dozens of different jobs that go into making a game, anywhere from the marketing team to, statistics and analytics to game design to engineering, to the art side of everything as well, to publishing and marketing. So there's so many different avenues that people can get involved in video games. And so that's something I wanted to highlight here and really try to expose. And so with each month, I highlight a game developer, a little spotlight. They get a little chocolate care package, which is always fun incentive. Yeah. And basically the things I want to highlight was put a face to the different jobs and highlight the different jobs that are out there. So this past month, we had for May, we had a young woman named Ying Liu, and she is a 3D character artist down at Blizzard. And for her, that's her dream job. And she talked a little bit about why she loves games, what got her into games, but also one of the questions I ask when developers fill out these surveys is, what advice do you have for anyone else who's interested in your role, like doing that type of job? What should they know? What should they pay attention to? And so one of the things that Ying had mentioned was, in her case, being a character artist, you're always modeling the new characters that are created. And so there has to be a really strong understanding of not only anatomy, but also basic, life drawing skills. And so she had mentioned about always looking to real life and paying attention, that attention to detail as well. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to create exposure for, was for anyone else or for other kids who are interested in game design. I don't want them to think about you only have to be an engineer. It's either a game designer or engineer. Like there's so many other roles within the game industry, and to really try to just open their eyes and anyone else's eyes as to what is involved in being a game developer.
Oh, that's a beautiful connection with
Thank
the
you.
chocolates, and I mean it's very sweet, if you will pardon the pun. I I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. But
No,
would you like to talk about, I'm looking at your site, but would you like to highlight some of your wares that you have available now for people?
sure. So right now on my shop, I have a handful of different chocolate boxes and then a couple of apparel products as well. So I have some sweatshirts that are a little bit more video game and chocolate oriented. And then in regards to the boxes, so I have my my basic line, which is the Mario variety box, which includes Mario, Luigi, Peach, Toad, Yoshi, and Bowser. So it's a nice little sampler of a whole bunch of different flavors. And then I also have the Power Up Hearts, which are an espresso filled caramel ganache, and then my Level Up Stars, which are a mango passion fruit ganache, which is really bright and fruity. And then as I'm going forward each month, I'm starting to introduce a kind of a special box for the month. And so for the month of June, I've got these vegan caramel Pac-Mans that are going to be coming up, which will be really adorable. And then one of the things, I still have a couple of boxes left of master Pokeballs that are on my site. I did for a chocolate chop challenge with another chocolatier based out of Colorado. And so she gave us kind of mystery ingredients, and we had to go make a chocolate based off those mystery ingredients. And for this one, we got lavender and peanut butter. And so I was like, all right, what's purple? And I was like, oh, the master Pokeball. um, so I made these really cute little master Pokeball chocolates that are filled with a lavender caramel and then a peanut butter crunchy ganache. And so I still
Mm.
have, I think I've got like two more boxes left of those. So those are up for grabs. But yeah, so it's kind of what I've got right now. And I'll keep doing pop-ups every other week here in FF, and then just kind of continuing as I can to expand and expose my business and share all the chocolates with everyone.
I I bet people get so excited when they see your pop-up shop.
Yeah, it's been great. The response has been really supportive and endearing. It's definitely, there's an aspect about starting your own business of, is this idea any good? Will other people be interested? Is this maybe the right decision to do? And it's always really reassuring to see people get really excited about the product or talk about it. And it helps to continue to give me confidence, and also to have moments when I do have moments of self-doubt and, maybe accidents in the kitchen where I'm like, all right, I have to keep going, not only because I'm doing this as something that I wanted to do for myself to start this, but also because I've had great customers and great, not only great reviews, but people have been really outspoken about how much they love the product. So it is really reassuring. So every little bit helps.
That's awesome. And as things start returning a little bit more to normal and you find your footing more and more, I think it'd be awesome to see you at conventions.
Yes, that has 100% been on my list, both between like gaming conventions, look at, anime comic book conventions as well. Also esports tournaments is another area that I've been looking
Oh,
into. So I had, it's funny because I had this whole list of like starting local in the Bay Area conventions and things to go to. And I also have so many other friends that either do esports stuff or like other conventions that they were really excited. They would tell me about like, oh, you should do this convention or to go to this place. And then of course, COVID hit. So all of that had to kind of take a back seat. But that is something I was talking with one of the other ladies that I used to work with. And she said, some things started opening back up. So revisiting which conventions and places I could go do another pop-up at for sure.
oh, that would be so much fun. And that's something I don't really see. The conventions I've been to, I don't really see a lot of food-based
Right. And
artists. I see a
yeah.
lot of costumes and art, which are great, but I never really see food. So you would stand out in a really good way, I think.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's one of those things where it's great because it's prepackaged and it's not messy. It's really easy to carry. And so yeah, I think it'll be great. I'm looking forward to being around those types of events again for sure.
Well, that kind of answers the question about your future plans for One Up chocolates. And you mentioned the Pac-Man vegan chocolates that are coming out in June. Do you have any other future plans with either One Up chocolates or your user interface and user experience design life that you'd like to
Yeah.
share?
Um, so another big aspect aside from um working with the developer each month to like kind of highlight them, one of the big things that I've started trying to network is working with other game studios actually. Sorry.
Oh no, it's allergy season.
Yeah, 100% allergies. Mm,
I know the
It's so bad. It's
feeling.
every spring and fall, like when everything decides to bloom.
Yeah, if you ever want to come here, please come in the fall or the winter because it's horrible.
Yeah. I was gonna say, actually, what part of Louisiana are you in?
I'm about an hour from New Orleans.
Okay, that's
Like,
not too bad. My
yeah.
sister-in-law is actually in New Orleans, so
Oh, okay.
time I go visit, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you've been down here before. Oh,
Yeah,
hopefully we'll see you at a convention down here. That would be awesome.
that would be amazing. Um, Going back to your question, future plans. So aside from, before I forget,
That's okay.
aside from, working with the developer each month, one of the big things that I've been trying to push and kind of start to network with is working with other game studios. One of the things that I would love to do is to make more chocolates for like custom chocolates for studios based on the games that they make and they create. I think that would be really fun and not only really cute, but also just really awesome to work with game studios. And, if they have a game, make chocolates that are based off of that game or really kind of help to embody, if their game was a chocolate, what would it look like? And that's something from a creative standpoint and networking standpoint, I'm really excited about cultivating and working with studios in the future. And for any studios who are listening, hit me up if if you're interested in some custom chocolates for your games. And so that's something I would really love to keep working with is, having that relationship with other game studios too.
Oh, I would love that. I would love to see you, especially with the indie studios. That would be so cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be
Oh,
really cute. And it's just whether it's for like customers or for their employees, like it's such a mood booster to I think it would be so great for people to see, chocolates that are based on the products that they're making or they're creating.
I personally would adore that. I'm all about eating. So,
Right.
and I see a lot of really cute things. Like I ordered a pen and some postcards from this game studio. They're making a game called Lake, and it's about being a postal worker in the 1980s. So it was a really cute idea to have people have the opportunity to buy postcards that they can send to their friends, which look really cool, but they're also advertising the game. But
Yeah.
man, I would love something edible as well for a game.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's one thing when I worked in the game industry, one of the big things that I loved doing, especially with my background in making cakes, is when I did cakes professionally, I always did sculpted cakes. So, 3D, in the case, like I made a Garfield cake, I made a Tupac cake, and all these different like 3D sculptured cakes. And that was one thing when I worked at game studios, I often got to do the launch cake. Um, and so that was something really fun for me, like having that, being able to share that with everyone else that I worked with, for them to be really excited about not only what was getting made, but also eating it made me really happy. Like it's going to get eaten. It's temporary art in a way, but and that's one of the big things too. What I love about pastry and doing one-up chocolates is just seeing the emotion on people's face and how excited they get and how momentarily happy they are with eating something that's awesome. And so that's definitely a feeling from, when I did those launch cakes to doing these chocolates now. Another reason why I would love to partner with game studios is to kind of continue help doing that and providing that essentially that emotional boost for developers and everyone who works on that game too, to be like, all right, here's something awesome, and they're like, yay.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen people do cookies before, so why can't I do chocolates?
Right, right, right. Who doesn't love chocolate?
I don't know, not friends of mine, that's for sure. Or
Same.
or if they don't like it, maybe that's a good thing because I can eat it. The
Right,
chocolates they
exactly.
don't eat, I can eat
Yeah.
it.
more for you, more for everyone else.
Yes. Well, how can people support you? Where can people find you and engage with you? Anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say Instagram, One Up Chocolates, and then my website is probably the best. Between Instagram and my website, those are the best avenues. Buy chocolate, or at least follow on Instagram because that's where I do a lot of my promotions and a lot of my marketing and advertisement of new products that are coming out and kind of also polling for new products as well. So if there's ideas that people have, like feel free to message me on Instagram or also it's a good vein for me to use for testing too, to see if people are interested in new types of products, which directions or which flavors they're interested in, because that's something too as well. I do a lot of the thinking and development on my side. I also want to engage with, other my customers and other people who are interested in these products to make sure that there's something that they are interested in as well, and they would be excited about because I really hope my chocolates make people happy.
Oh, they are beautiful to look at on Instagram and on your website. So I can only imagine how much better they taste. And I can't wait till it's cooler down here so I can order some.
Yay.
Well, Mira, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself, about chocolates, about your profession, advice, anything else you'd like to share?
The only thing I can think of, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you, and it was
Oh, me
really lovely
too.
to talk about this. It is such a peculiar crossover, so I was really surprised and amazed and like excited to talk to somebody who is not only interested on the chocolate side, but also on the game development side. Is really unique, and so I'm just really excited to talk to you today. As far as anything else, I would say, for anyone who's listening, watching, you know, reach out to me on Instagram. I love talking, if you have questions about chocolate development or even game development as well, I'd be happy to try to help you out and answer those questions. And then, of course, any ideas for chocolates you'd like to see in the future. And lastly, of course, feel free to buy any of the chocolates. And each box that I ship out comes with, a little thank you note and includes a card for the developer of the month as well. So that way you get that message right to your door.
Oh, thank you. I love that. That's so sweet. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what new ideas you come up with because you're in your infancy with this,
Yeah,
basically.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
It's
thank you.
been
Oh,
a long yeah, it's been a bit of a journey getting here. Obviously COVID kind of threw a like 9 month delay into things, but it
oh.
worked out. Yeah, it worked out in the end, and One Up Chocolates is here. It's here to stay, and I'm really excited to keep growing it and evolving it to be more awesome than it is.
And I like seeing that it's working out for you because you're hearing so much about lumber is expensive. There's a car shortage. There's supply shortages across the board. So I'm hoping that things start to pick up and things start to improve. So hearing your story and how you're able to do this, even with the challenges, that's very inspiring and it gives me hope for the world.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I hope things get to a better state for sure. I know there's been some other chocolatiers and other small food businesses like packaging has been a huge issue. The whole supply chain has been just really delayed, and that's been really hard for some businesses to kind of get, inventory and items in. And fortunate that I try to work as local as possible. So in regards to my chocolate, like it's all local. And so, a lot of my other ingredients are local as well. So I think that really helps on the supply chain side. But, it is, there's always something that comes, like my packaging, for example, as well. Like that still takes like a month to get not only created and shipped. So it is still one of those things that can get delayed as well. But yeah, that's similar supply chain issues for a lot of other businesses, especially food businesses through COVID. It's been really rough from what I've been hearing from friends.
Oh my gosh. And I don't think a lot, well, I think people are realizing now because things have been exposed how much is involved to create a product in any industry. So I'm really hoping people are kinder to one another and more appreciative of what people have to go through just to make that one item you crave or
Yeah,
need.
100%. And it's shed a good bit of light too on cost. Like, chocolate, for example, if you get good chocolate, it's not cheap. It has to be a certain quality in order to make certain products like bonbons or truffles. Otherwise, the product kind of falls apart. And so, dairy, for example, is another thing that dairy and sugar can be expensive too. And people don't realize that, like, if you're running a business, you're definitely analyzing, how much the cost of your product is across all of, how much does it cost to actually make your product. And dairy and sugar are also, their prices go up each year too. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah, everybody's trying to make a living. That's the thing people we have to remember is everything we consume, it's helping someone else put food on the table, helping someone else pay bills and make it through the day. So I'm really hoping people appreciate that as we
yeah, a
go
little.
along.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is I hope that everyone has a little bit more or learns a little bit more empathy, in understanding not only what do people go through, but the the battles or the things that are going on that are not visible. There's a lot that happens essentially either behind the scenes or that you can't visualize. So more empathy for the world.
Oh, I would love that. And I mean, I grew up, I'm a millennial, and as people, I think
Me too.
people kind of, oh, you are too. So we're in that generation where we remember life without internet and having to wait on things. And now it's a lot of instant gratification. And that's, that's not, that's helpful and convenient, but that's not always how life works. That's kind of a bonus rather than the rule, I think.
Yeah. It's an interesting change in habits too.
I know,
Mm.
I know, and I thank you for that, Mira, about the empathy. And listeners, as one of our quotes for the Boss Rush Games Network is, "Be you, be better, play games, just be a better person, be kind." And I hope that you all walk away thinking that I'm going to go do something nice for somebody. Maybe I'll buy them some chocolates from One Up Chocolates and make their day. But you can
Yeah,
find you can find us at bossrushgames.com. This is the 1v1 podcast where we interview creators from pretty much every walk of life you can imagine. Thank you all so much for listening. Mira, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. Instagram has connected me to some great people, and you're one of them, so I'm very, very happy for that.
thank you so much, Celeste. It was absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And until next time, everybody, we'll talk to you later. Bye, guys.